We're going to roll right into our part 2 of food service discussion. The good news is we identified food service as a key topic for edible publishers this year and for all of us to think about and to work on as a key scaling solution to so many of our food challenges. And with that, I wanted to welcome up Danielle Nuremberg and the other panelists. Danielle is president of FoodTech. It's an incredible rising food organization that if you don't know about, you should find out about and follow immediately. Danielle is an expert on sustainable agriculture. She's written extensively on gender and population, the spread of factory farming in the developing world, and innovations in sustainable agriculture. FoodTech is sort of the main clearinghouse nowadays for all good things happening in food activism and global food policy. Danielle has authored or contributed to several major reports and books, including Happier Meals, Rethinking the Global Meat Industry, State of the World, Innovations That Nourish the Planet, Eating Planet 2012 with the Barilla Foundation in Italy, and she's also collaborated with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And a personal plug, Danielle and I were colleagues for many years at the World Watch Institute, so I'm personally a big fan of her work. Danielle, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know if this is on, but I hope you can hear me. Again, I'm Danielle Nuremberg. I'm a co-founder and president of FoodTech, and I'm really excited to be here today. I want to thank Edible Communities for organizing such a fantastic event. And I want to thank especially Brian Hallweil and his colleagues for their leadership in putting this together. So let's give them a round of applause. I think they deserve it. I also want to recognize the folks who are watching via live stream. I know it's kind of hard for them to participate. If you want to email me at danielle@foodtech.com while you're watching, I can get some questions to the panelists. And I'll also be checking the event Twitter hashtag, which is behind me, which is #Edible2014. Again, it's really an honor to be with this panel. I'm very excited to have them here. I think, we have sort of the easy job. We get to talk about the solutions. The last panel really was able to dive into some of the challenges around one of the biggest obstacles in the food service industry around food waste and what to do and how to do it. And I think what we'll be able to do in this panel is really expand on some of the exciting innovations that are happening in the food service industry and really give some stories of hope and inspiration. And that's what FoodTech has been able to do over the last year and a half. We've really been able to highlight stories of hope and success in the food system. Real challenges that are and innovations that are helping alleviate hunger, prevent obesity, improve incomes, and protect the environment. And these are changes coming from chefs, from eaters, from farmers, from scientists, and of course from the business community. Restaurants, hotels, and food professionals are realizing that good food means fair wages for farmers and workers alike, and that the practices they start today can really spur innovation across the food system. The food service industry, perhaps more than any other industry, has the power to educate, inspire, and propel better practices. And these are changes that are happening all over the world. Chefs like Jose Andres and Bobby Chin, who's in Vietnam, and global hotel chains like Marriott are influencing how food is grown, distributed, preserved, and eaten in both developing and industrialized countries alike. And it's because of just consumer demand and the good work that you all are doing communicating these issues that the changes are happening. Eaters want to eat food that has a story, that tastes delicious, and that they can feel good spending money on. So what I'd like to do is briefly introduce our panelists, and I'll ask them a few questions to really create some discussion. But I want you to remember that, they're not only experts on their stage. As we all know, there are a lot of experts in the audience and watching via live stream, so I'm hoping this can be really participatory. First, I'd like to introduce Anne McBride. Anne is the Culinary Program Director and Editor for the Strategic Initiatives Group at the Culinary Institute of America. In addition to being a co-author of several books, Anne also works on program development for industry leadership conferences, including Worlds of Flavor. Anne is the director of the Experimental Cuisine Collective, a group of more than 2,000 scientists, chefs, media, academics, and food enthusiasts that looks at the connections between food and science. Next, I'm really honored to have Brad Nelson here today. Brad is the Vice President of Culinary and the Global Corporate Chef at Marriott International. He oversees Marriott's culinary strategy for its 15 brands and 3,700 hotels in 73 countries. Oh, sorry about that. Brad has been a pioneer in sustainability efforts around food, leading many of Marriott's most innovative food initiatives, including eliminating trans fats from their menus in 2006 and starting Future Fish, which is Marriott's sustainable seafood program, which was introduced in 2010. And then last but not least, we have Jeffrey Zarofsky with us. In 2003, he co-founded Witchcraft Sandwich Shops. The company produces gourmet sandwiches using only local, seasonal, and sustainable ingredients. And the first store here in New York utilizes a partnership with Grow NYC to source ingredients, and all or many of the locations work with the Fresh Air Fund to employ inner city kids and really develop job and leadership skills. Jeffrey has also led the company's efforts around expansion in San Francisco and Las Vegas, and has also recently co-founded in 2011, I believe, River Park Farm, which supplies fresh produce to River Park Restaurant. So thank you for all being here today. Let's dive in. Anne, I'd like to start with you. From your perspective, what are the connections between independent restaurants and high-volume food service? Are there specific ways that you see trends trickling both down and up from some of the small restaurant chains to the bigger chains in the industry? And how do you get the big players to be more responsive to what's happening on a smaller scale?
So I think the trends trend to trickle more from independent restaurants to high volume, just because independent restaurants can be a lot more mobile in what they're able to achieve. They can they can put something as a special on the menu within a few hours' notice in a way that the people who work for Brad are not able to do as easily, I think. But he'll talk about that. That's his expertise. So I think a lot of the obviously, the high-volume food service operators are very aware of farm-to-table trends, whole animal trends, et cetera, that small restaurants have been doing for many years now. And I was thinking about that during the previous panel on food waste. A lot of those methods are very useful in terms of reducing food waste. If you're using whole animals, for example, or if you're preserving and pickling, fermenting vegetables. So those are some of the things that I think high-volume restaurants can learn from. They can learn these techniques. They can learn to push their customers a little bit more in terms of flavors and dishes and ingredients that their customers might not be as aware of or might not be familiar with, and find ways to be creative with those to make them appealing to we're a foodie audience here. It's very easy for us to think about eating broccoli tops and that type of things in a way that a lot of people might not necessarily jump on and crave right away. So I think the creativity process and that trickle-down effect can really help bring more solutions that address sustainability, nutrition, and food waste at a high level. But that said, I think And in the programs that we do at the CIA, I work with a lot of independent chefs, and I bring them to the stage for then people like Brad to hear about the trends and what they're doing in their restaurants. So what is always interesting is how much the independent chefs can learn from the high volume operators who are in the room, because it's very easy to not think about the problems that are being faced when you're trying to feed thousands and thousands and thousands of people a day. And when you're doing things like buying 20% or 30% of local foods, and you're the new school, for example, and you have a food plan, you're able to make massive changes changes by something, we might not be satisfied by 20 to 30%, but it's already a huge impact when we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. So I think it really goes both ways to understand the challenges. Independent chefs can help more if they know and understand better what big food is facing, and not just criticizing or shutting it aside as not sharing similar values.
Can you expand, you mentioned nutrition and how that's information and better nutrition can flow between these two groups of chefs and cooks. Can you talk more about that?
So one of the things that we're doing with the Menus of Change, which is the CIA's conference on the businesses of sustainability. So we're looking at the intersection of nutrition, public health, and good taste while creating profitable businesses, is looking at ways in which you can reduce meat consumption, for example, because that's one of the biggest problems from an environmental perspective and from a nutritional perspective. So how do you move people towards eating more vegetables? And you have to find ways to make that creative and to do that in a way that creates value also, so that people will be willing to pay. I can't remember what it was for the great Northern Spy carrot dish that created a whole hoopla on social media, because I think it was $22 or something like that for carrots. And some people were like, why would you pay that for a main dish, for a main course of just vegetables? So it's this idea of understanding the labor that goes into growing the right vegetables, into processing and cooking vegetables in a way that makes them appealing. So that's where the nutrition comes into play in terms of making better decisions and being able to create dishes that will be satisfying, that will have this implication of value, that it is worth paying for something that is better for you, better for the planet.
That's great. Brad, I'm going to go to you next. You've mentioned to me that millennials represent a whole new crop of eaters and consumers, and that they're probably looking for different things in hotel and restaurant experiences than the baby boomer generation. And so my question is, can you talk about some of the opportunities that exist to meet the millennials' needs, as well as create more awareness about food and sustainability among different generations or older consumers?
Sure. I think it's a number of things, and actually, what I find actually is the millennials are really becoming the catalyst, but it really is a cross-generational viewpoint and approach that honestly people just want to know more about the food they're eating, and I call it kind of the story of the food. And we talk to chefs about putting menus together and concept design and whatnot. One of the key elements and strategies that we have to look to is, what is the story? What is your story? What is the story of the food you're using, you're producing, you're sourcing? And I think to a large degree that is part of this generation's viewpoint that has changed the rest of the world viewpoint. But I do think it's more cross-generational than believed. I also feel it's much more global than believed. And part of the responsibilities that I have is overseeing not just in North America, but across the globe. I was just in the Middle East last week, and it was amazing to me to hear the chef tell me of this giant new hotel we put up in Dubai. The chef tell me how excited he was about being able to source local melons and fruits 9 months out of the year in Dubai. Now, my first time to Dubai in 2003, everything came in on a plane. And I think as we go around the world, this is not just a U.S. Group in this room concern. And I actually think it's something that the idea that people want to know more about where food came from, how it got there, and be able to include that in their approach is really the big movement, rather than just one generation want to eat something. I think food trends come and go. It's funny. I graduated 30 years ago in a few weeks from CIA, and at that point we were not talking about things like we're talking about now in terms of nutrition and whatnot, in terms of where it came from. But we were talking about quality of product, and that hasn't changed. And I think the definition of quality and kind of what makes the quality is some of the things that have changed. But, food trends will come and go, and we'll go from small plates and, everything about bacon to something else next. And at some point, kale will actually not be the thing that everybody has to eat. But I think that's just kind of an evolution of what happens.
Well, and you talked about telling the story. Can you explain a little bit about how Marriott shares that story, how they tell the story to their customers?
Well, a number of ways. I think the great thing about a company like ours, so we've got many competitors, several competitors, but we're really a collection of many individual restaurants. The idea, quite frankly, of this concepted or leveraged concept across the globe, and everybody's eating off of one menu, and it's all controlled from headquarters is wrong. That doesn't happen. There's no way I could write every menu for our company. And those days are gone. So what we really have is each individual property being unique to itself and have its own sense of place, and to be able to include within that sense of place the sourcing and the products on the menus that are part of that. So strategically, we spend a lot of time talking about how to do that, how to talk to farmers, and how to talk to producers, how to talk to distributors about what it is that is most important to that hotel, and the focus on local, whatever your definition of local is something that is critically, and that's significantly changed in the last 15 years. There was a time when it was all about leverage. Now it's still about leverage to some degree, and I think some of the suppliers back there would agree that we can all have great conversations on the power of leverage, but the idea that it really is most important to be closest to the community is a way that we bring that forward.
Great. Jeffrey, I know one of the things that interests you is the opportunity for creating for-profit models in urban areas that develop relationships between large-scale food service and farmers. Is this the kind of sort of food hub concept that you're seeing with the Riverfront Farm at the Alexandria Center? And how do you see that kind of model expanding, not just for your businesses, but for other businesses as well?
Yeah, so just to clarify a couple points. So I'm on the board of Grow NYC, and we actually purchase, at the height of summer, almost all of our produce at Witchcraft from the wholesale green market system that we set up about 3 years ago. And River Park Farm is a wonderful place as attached to a restaurant. It's not a scalable solution. We don't promote it as such. It is a half-acre farm in Manhattan real estate, which is virtually impossible. We're fortunate enough to have this piece of land. But it is a way of marketing the idea that food and connection to food is vital to our understanding of it. But I'll have to say that we built Witchcraft with the idea that it was a values-based business from day one, which is we were going to make the type of food that was accessible in a fine dining restaurant accessible to a larger audience. And we've I think, been able to do that successfully. We're still, I'd say, serving a community that can afford the type of food that is available out there that is good. And I say this being recorded, I sort of have a Trojan horse strategy as it relates to food systems, which is the more, and I think most of us can affect some change as we get to grow, and that is our food system is completely broken, I think, and with all due respect to everyone, myself included, who's working within it to make change, it's broken from the top, it's broken from government. And Grow NYC has been fortunate enough to ride this incredible wave of growth within the restaurant business in New York City, and I'll call it the fetishization of food, which is, I have to get these ramps when they come out at springtime, and I have to get these strawberries, and I have to get this, and I have to get this, and I have to dip my bacon in chocolate, and I have to have an artisanal producer of this, et cetera, which is fantastic, but it's not going to solve our problems. It's not going to solve the waste problem. It's not going to solve the nutrition problem. It's not going to solve the healthcare problem. It's not going to solve our economic problem in upstate New York. It's not going to solve the major issues until we all collectivize around a voice of change for the subsidies program that affects the rest of the industry. And we all know those numbers. So circling back to sort of food hubs and whatnot in our mission. So my particular mission, personal, and this is not my nighttime job, it's not my moonlighting job, it's my daytime job, is to figure out how do we affect change vocally, with our dollars, with our staff, to change, somehow tilt the favor of the $17 billion a year of food subsidies that go to $13 billion of which goes to 4 companies for 4 products. How do we tilt that into, 1% of those $17 billion goes to specialty crops, which is the stuff we're talking about, kale and carrots and other things. How do we shift that through all the good work we can do? I mean, Ann, you can affect change in the minds of the burgeoning students who are going to come out and change the food system. Brad, you've got an incredible business and oversee an international business, which I can't even comprehend in terms of affecting that kind of change. And so that's been my challenge. It's been my opportunity, my goal, and my passion. And I think the more we talk about this, we're going to solve things like, I think, Ben, you had said it, that, it's a blessing and a curse if people waste less food in the restaurants, right, because then you can't feed people, which just goes to show you that the hunger problem is insolvable unless we change it at the core and the system, and not necessarily at the periphery.
Well, so I'm interested, how does Witchcraft want to do that? How do you move all that forward?
Well, I think, and this is again my Trojan horse philosophy, which is the more money we can put into the pockets of local producers, small farmers, is going to hopefully get them out of a particular situation, which is the constant situation of needing to go to monoculture crops and to sort of think about leverage, think about economies of scale within the food system. You're seeing a lot of 6-acre. The only growth in farming, of small farm percentage in the last 10 years has been in the 6 to 20-acre farm development. Everything else has been, consolidated over the last 40 years, from 5.3 million farms to 1.6 million farms in the U.S. And the only growth we've seen is in this, sort of smaller farm growth, which is incredible. The more we get those folks to have, to make it a profitable venture and one which they can actually start to see the light at the end of the tunnel and say, okay, I'm going to spend a little bucks, maybe lobbying, maybe collectivizing, maybe creating a unified voice using dollars. I believe the National Restaurant Association, the amount of money spent on lobbying for the Farm Bill last year from the 4 major companies who've done it was $25 million. That's not a lot of money when you think about it. I mean, the NRA only spent $5 million lobbying on a gun issue, right? So my partner Tom Clicchio has been talking about Vote Food as a hashtag. You can do that on Twitter, although more on the ground is more important. But the issue is, how do we? I think the more we can sort of organize and create a community like the edible communities to start to actually put their dollars into the same place and to create a single issue. To affect change in Congress and also local agricultural state houses and such, I think we're going to see change, and that's the practical of it, right? Is we have $700 billion last year that was spent in food service, by consumers. So take 1% of that, and you've already outshone the amount of money spent on lobbying Congress last year for $13 billion annually. So. And every 5 years, we get a chance to do this, right? Every 5 years, or 7 if Congress is lazy and has continuing resolutions on Farm Bill issues. But 7 years, every 5 years, we have a chance to make change. And so that's how we're going to make change. And that's how Witchcraft's doing it. We're helping to support those local economies, and then through Grow NYC, Collective Voice, make change locally. One of the hunger programs that hunger and food economy programs we started and have self-funded is double dollars for SNAP bucks, for Chef bucks at the Green Market. If you buy food at the Green Market using SNAP, we'll match it dollar for dollar. So there are ways to do this, but it also has to come from the top.
Absolutely. And I just want to go back a second to something Brad said about talking to chefs, talking to producers, and sort of creating that conversation. And then, I'd really be interested in hearing how CIA does that. How do you teach chefs to talk to farmers and learn about these issues who might not know a lot about them? How do you get them on board to really understand these issues better and reach out to producers?
So I don't work on the education side at CIA. I work on continuing education, on industry leadership programs. So very briefly, in terms of what we do with students, a lot of it comes from faculty who are passionate about issues and communicate that a lot in their classes, and take students often beyond, as sort of extracurricular programs, take them to meet farmers, meet producers locally. And then we just started a farm-to-table program at the CIA in California, led by Larry Forgione, who was one of the first chefs to, it's thanks to him that we have free-range eggs, for example, one of the pioneers of American cuisine. And so he started a program to really get students to understand what it means to cook farm to table, because it's not just your farmer delivering a truck full of farm-raised food and fresh food and seasonal food, et cetera, but what does it mean to actually be in the field? What does it mean to understand droughts, especially huge this year in California, to understand seasons from the soil, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way, because he also obviously brings a lot of guest speakers and guest experts. And but so on the industry leadership side, to get chefs to understand that it is through bringing them in front of the, as part of programs, putting them on the stage, and then creating these spaces where during a 3-day conference they can really have conversations and interact and better understand each other. And then through this Menus of Change initiative, which is one conference, but we're doing this as a year-round effort where we publish a report that works a lot on debunking myth, around these questions of sustainable foods at the crossroad of nutrition, public health, and taste, and profitability. And then also we've started blog posts and to highlight the issues that people will see in the news from a food service voice perspective. So we connect what you might be reading in the New York Times or the Washington Post in a way that is really in the language of chefs for chefs, that helps also give them the vocabulary to then in turn talk to their staff, their suppliers, et cetera, and understand where they can go to look for information and connections.
Great. Brad, let's come back to you for a second. I know Marriott has been able to establish on-site gardens at a lot of the restaurants at its hotels. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of those gardens? Do you see more return customers coming back to these restaurants because of the gardens? And do you see more local folks visiting, a hotel restaurant that they might not have otherwise gone to before?
Well, a couple of things. Actually, I also want to build off of some of the earlier comments as well. I think as it relates to the education and working with chefs, I think chefs are probably one of the biggest advocates for all that we are saying here. I think when we start to overlay some of the real-life challenges is where that advocate becomes a little bit discouraged. And I think it's a number of ways that we can fix that. I go back to actually a great story of about 8 years ago. North Carolina is a very rural state, and primarily for many, many years was built on tobacco and whatnot. And in Charlotte, we had a very opportunistic conversation between our chef there and a local idealist that was trying to get broadband into these farms. And they came up with this idea of linking in what turned out to be 85 separate farms that used to grow just tobacco to be growing products and produce specifically for the chefs in that community. And the key was that bringing the broadband in allowed them to post up what they were actually growing, what was available then and now, and they set up their own distribution to do that. So that turned into, frankly, capitalizing on all of that unused land or improperly used land, and brought in real fresh, real local, great product to the kitchens of not just ours, but about 100 different restaurants and hotels in North Carolina. The garden piece, we've got probably 200 gardens around the world, everywhere from a 6-acre farm at the Orlando Grand Lakes facility. I guess facility would be the wrong thing to call that, the property hotel. To, you know, those that in Chicago, for example, on the ninth floor of Chicago Marriott, there's 5 big planters filled with lots of herbs and vegetables and whatnot. Now, these gardens are a number of things. One, they kind of help us and actually get the knowledge of the product into the line staff and to be able to have a better connection with what food is. When we talk about food waste and food overproduction, what I find the most helpful is to actually show people, you know, a little bit more about how it got there rather than just in a box in the walk-in. And we find that there's a lot less overproduction and a lot more care taken when they have that connection. But there is no way we could grow any more than 1% of the needs in these gardens. So they're really just for educational and for a few specific things that we might do. Same thing with beehives. We've got beehives, I don't know, we probably have more bees in our hotels than guests. If you factor all the, you know, around the world, but that's probably not something our marketing group would want. But you know, the amount of honey and whatnot that we use goes to a variety of purposes, and where we can find, again, that story is where we pull it in. So again, back to the Marriott in Chicago, there's 5 beehives on the 9th floor. We actually take all that honey and make a honey ale with one of the local craft brewers and pull that story in. But I think this idea of actually partnering with the farmers in the community and helping them build the distribution is the biggest problem, folks. All that we've said and talked about here, you've just kind of glanced over the real problem, which is distribution. But I think if we can help with that, we can get there and also find, you know, great support. The last story I want to tell is similar to the tobacco farms of North Carolina, northern Thailand, north of Chiang Mai, was an area that just grew poppies. And there's a project that the King of Thailand put together called the King's Project to actually go to these poppy farmers and convince them to grow fresh produce that is then distributed amongst the needy and sent to hotels and used by people like us. And so when we can actually help support by finding and building the market, then I think a lot of these things can come through and come true. And it's, again, building the market to then justify the opportunity cost of not doing it, but also the opportunity cost of building out the distribution network.
I'm just going to jump in on that. That's really awesome, Brad. I know that there's been commitments from large food vendors like Chipotle, or they're going to commit $10 million of purchases to local, and I commend that as well. But I don't think it's as meaningful as you know, what you guys are doing. And to your point, community gardens or restaurant gardens like the farm at River Park are not going to change the food system, and they're really about marketing, and they're really about showing and creating opportunities for people to get more connected to food. And I think distribution is, you touched on it, which is, that's the biggest issue. You have people who can't get off their farms, they don't know how to get to market, they're not going to make 20 stops at restaurants in New York City during, you know, 3 times a week or whatever it is, in order to continue supply. And so they're doing 2 jobs, right? They're doing growing, and then they got to do marketing and distribution, and it's not built into a small farm business model. And so that's why wholesale green market, you know, we invested in trucks, and we're going around and picking up and distributing. But I think there needs more support from restaurants, from chains, and not just your small independent restaurants, but folks like Marriott and other large to sort of say, well, food's coming to our door normally, but how about we go get the food, or how about we partner up and invest in that. And I think as that grows, or that idea takes root, people will, you'll start to see a whole different model and an expansion within that 6 to 20 acre farm, you know, model, because then people can really focus on growing food and not have to worry about paying their bills or, you know, outside of, and spend money on marketing and distribution. So,
if I can jump in also, I think Anna made a really important point this morning in terms of, you never know if you're the first or the last drop in a bucket, and eventually the bucket fills up. So I think that I want to disagree with this idea that you can't change things with a garden that fills 1% of your needs, because that's 1% that adds up to another percent, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was a really important point.
I didn't say you can't change.
Yeah.
I didn't say that, but I said the major purpose for it is something a little bit different than just trying to supply your entire restaurant. I think Brad said that as well.
It's different, but I think it's very much part of an inspirational and educational model of change. And the same way that whatever Marriott does or Unilever does, or Chipotle also, their scale has become so big now, has such a massive impact on I don't want to say real changes, but world-shifting changes in a way, when they're changing their supply methods or their distribution methods, or et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of those stories come from the inspiration provided by people who can do it with the garden that is a few planters that's enough to supply their restaurants, or a very small garden, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that we really try to do is to highlight case studies at all levels, case studies of very young companies that can do anything they want, because sustainability is built in their business model and in what they're starting right now, and like the two companies we heard from before. And then what happens to companies like Marriott or Bon Appetit or Unilever, who have to function within very long-standing business models, and so they can't start from scratch. They have to change within something that exists already, and so this is where also, I mean, it's slightly a variation on that, but within those organizations, the people who control taste, the chefs, can really function as agents of change. And what you were saying in terms of having the chefs as leaders, ultimately it comes down to making food that tastes delicious and that people want to keep on eating, and it shouldn't matter to the consumer how that food gets to them, in a way, as long as you can hide those messages, you can hide the moral aspect that can turn off some people by just making food that is delicious and that they will continue to crave. And the chefs are the people who will be able to do that.
I want to open it up for questions now. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know we're standing between you and lunch. So let's take some questions from the audience.
Who's going to make it first?
There's one in the back.
Hi, my name is Joshua Krieger. I'm one of the owners of a prepared meal company in Washington, D.C., Power Supply, and we try to use fresh and local where possible, and all the challenges you all mentioned come to light every day in our business. We have this theory that there's sort of this group of untapped chefs, and we use local chefs, and they have a lot of independence and autonomy, that there's this group of untapped, sort of awakened chefs, if you will, that are coming out of schools and education that are already out there that we haven't accessed yet. I'm curious, in particular, with Marriott, if you mentioned the educational component is key, but also have you been more effective at recruiting chefs that already have some inherent desire to sort of go in the direction that we're talking about, and how have you found those individuals?
Yeah, well, I think quite frankly, it's kind of in the DNA of most chefs now. It's actually what brings a lot of chefs into the business, and even those that are in the business as more just, that's kind of the work that they landed in, can kind of feel that as well. So I actually don't think it's as much of a communication issue with the chefs. I actually think it's a communication issue with the broader population. I think we hear all of this, we hear about food that's tasty and whatnot, yet there is a smaller list of ingredients that most people are willing to order on menus than we would all believe in this room. And I think that is the bigger challenge. It's not really, education across the board with culinarians is always an ongoing issue. But it's not really the issue with the chefs. It's actually an issue with, if I put it on the menu and nobody buys it, then I don't put it on the menu anymore. And that's just the economics of business. So I think that's part of it.
By the way, that's a really good point. We could touch on that too, but what's not oftentimes discussed because no one wants to touch it, it's a taboo subject, is consumer choice. And you can create trends. Kale can be the next big thing because it's cool. We're in an echo chamber as it relates to kale, as far as I'm concerned, and in our small little world, right? And again, that goes back to where are the levers on consumer choice, and 40% of the food being wasted. If you break that down, it's not all. A lot of it's food scraps, but 40% of food being wasted in the country is related a large part to people just ordering too much and making too much, and I do it all the time. I get sick when I buy something. I got broccoli in my drawer right now. I haven't gotten around to cooking, and I'm sick about it. But the idea that like we all waste food because we think we want more, we need more, and we really don't. I mean, we have 40% food waste. That's about equal to the amount of calories that we eat on average, which is more than our recommended number of calories. So if you just sort of think about it in those terms, wow, aha, okay, let's eat less and choose less, and let's get more nutrient-rich foods into our diet, and let's get the nutrient lacking foods out of our diet.
My biggest fantasy is that all the high-volume restaurants will get together one day and say, you know what, let's all reduce our portion size by 20% and change that consumer
that's awesome.
mindset.
We have fought for the last 11 years at Witchcraft to this notion, and we get tons of comments about it. It's not big enough, it's not filling enough, et cetera. And my answer is just wait 20 minutes, and it will be. There's science behind that, right? Ghrelin in your stomach doesn't release until 20 minutes later to tell you you're not hungry anymore. We all know about hangry, why we're hangry, right? It's because the signals from our stomach to our brain, and that's a whole nother conversation about mindful eating and such. But to your point, and if we could just, I know that was your biggest fantasy, by the way, but that's we've been fighting this for 11 years, and it's in the restaurant business it's fast, cheap, and good. Pick two, and you don't get to pick three. And cheap has become synonymous with big. So it doesn't matter about the price as much as it matters about the size. And I think we need to shift that to being where. We've chosen not to be cheap, obviously, but I shouldn't say obviously, but we're going to be fast and good, and we're not going to trade on price or cost. And I think that if we were to reduce the amount that you have and still charge it the same, then we're going to get a fair price for our food, for where it comes from, and for wages for our employees, because we have to make less of that. And then people are going to be in a different spot when it comes to nutrition and health. So,
Great.
Hello.
Other?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me? Yep. Good. You talked about distribution and sustainability quite a bit. I was wondering if you had any thoughts around aquaponics in helping in environments where it's hard to grow lots of produce all year round or for a majority of the year.
Actually, I'm glad you brought up hydroponics. I actually think that's probably one of the most exciting things going for us. I would really love to see some of these more industrial cities that we've got these big buildings that are empty that could be filled with hydroponics, and that could be one of the ways to really answer this seasonality and local question. I grew up in Seattle, spent many years in the Bay Area, and obviously New York, and there are great places that you can really be seasonal local, but nowhere better than that. If you go to some of the more seasonal weather-prone, brutal winter parts of the world, you can say all you want about being seasonal and local, but you're only talking about a couple of seasons. I think the idea of actually using and reclaiming some of these spaces that are already there for hydroponics, and I do love a lot of the product. So I think there's great future in that. And we actually work with a couple of companies that we're trying to help them actually, again, be that market for them. One in Detroit and one in Tampa.
It wouldn't be a good panel discussion if someone didn't disagree. So I think it's cool. It's interesting stuff. I don't know enough about hydroponics specifically, but I do know about soil and rich soil and what it means for our environment and what it means for local economies as well. So some of the best farmers in our system at Grow NYC in the green markets are, if you go up to visit their farms, they have the best soil. They've spent years cultivating it, years rotating crops, years creating, and let's be frank about seasonality. And Brad, you make a great point, which is, we'll all be eating, up until about a couple weeks ago, we'd all be eating beets and carrots and potatoes and, it's just not what we want, right? And consumers are part of this. But seasonal and local is only important to some degree. I think it's not the big issue, right? There are local economies everywhere. We can't get citrus here, right? It's just not possible. So am I going to stop eating lemon? No. And if I'm buying good lemons from somewhere else, I feel good about that. And I think that's just as important as buying. I'm not going to trade potatoes for lemons in the middle of February. So I don't necessarily think there's this uber notion that seasonality or local has to trump all. It has to be more of it, but more of it means more about when it's time to reap what's been sown, you're getting a fair price for it. And you're getting a fair price for it because it's high quality, because people understand what goes into it. And I think that's more important than necessarily growing everything in abandoned buildings. Frankly, I think there needs to continue to be a redistribution of wealth from urban centers to rural centers through food. Food is a currency in which we can transmit those dollars, and to just continue to consolidate dollars through growing in urban centers is not, I think, a sustainable or scalable model. I think we're going to miss out on a huge opportunity. We're going to miss out on environmental change. We're going to miss out on economic change. Not everyone wants to live in a city. Not everyone's going to live in a city, even though people are moving towards it. But I think there's going to be a bounce back, and that's my opinion. It's like we have to focus more on solutions that are outside, where the soil is rich, where the soil can be rich.
Right on. I think that's it for this panel. I want to thank our panelists for coming today and all of you for staying. Thank you.